Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful theatre. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we start. In case of a fire alarm, which I'm sure we won't have one, fire exits are to this side and the back, and the staff and our community builders will assist. Photographs, if you want to take any, let me know because I will pose. No flash photography, and could you make sure all your mobile phones are either turned off or turned to silent. It's going to be a fabulous afternoon. We've got some fabulous people here who I've had the pleasure of working with in different roles. So first of all, we're going to welcome David Scott for his wonderful talks with Ian Churchwood's songs about the history of Torquay, which will all tie in with David. So David Scott's an author of The Funk Home Myth, the story of Torquay in World War II, and the Operation Single, a novel about the life in the town between 1920 and 1940. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to hand you straight over to David Scott.
Thank you, David. Wow, what a turnout. It's a privilege to be with you today. It really is. It was while I was researching and writing the history of Upton Vale Baptist Church here in Torquay that I noticed the difference between life in the town in the Second World War compared with the First World War. And when I made enquiries, I discovered that while there were some excellent books and pamphlets had been written about different aspects of life in Torquay between 1939 and 1945, there was no book I could find that brought everything together under one title. Further research over many months revealed an incredibly ill-informed campaign led by some national newspapers to label Torquay residents as shirkers who were happy to do as little as they could for the war effort and accommodate the idle rich who were keen to escape the big cities. The more I delved into the record, the more I realised that it was about time that somebody set the record straight and dispelled the many myths surrounding the part Torquay played in the Second World War. For Torquaynians, it was a totally different experience to the one they had endured between 1914 and 1918. When war broke out in 1939, Torquay soon found it had to play a far new, different role. The arrival of thousands of evacuees was the first indication that things would be different this time, followed soon after by the first of 50,000 RAF personnel doing their initial training. For the first 2 years, the national press did no more than snipe occasionally, but it was the comments of one Torquay councillor at the Chamber of Trade meeting in February 1941 that led to the Daily Mirror group of newspapers and then other members of the London press labelling the whole town a funkhole for the next 4 years. Even worse followed. Torquay was regularly named and shamed as one of the top black spots where people had either fled their homes or were seeking to come to somewhere safe, away from the hardships of war. Or even worse, the local residents were doing very little to aid the war effort. Of course, it was nothing new for a tabloid newspaper to get its teeth into an issue and never let go. Even today, London-based journalists believe Torquay is mainly populated by the upper classes, and as such is a good target for left-wing newspapers. The Mirror's William Connor, better known as the country's best-read columnist Cassandra, waged a personal war on shirkers throughout the war. Once he had established in the public mind what sort of place he believed Torquay to be between 1939 and 1945, his rants and innuendos didn't always have to name the town for everyone to know where he was talking about. Of course, he never visited Torquay during the war. Now, the word funk is hardly used today, but a funkhole was a derogatory term used in both world wars to describe this safe retreat from any sort of duties and where the idle rich with money to spend could escape the bombings and privations suffered by those in the big cities. Now, it is true that some hotels did accommodate a few elderly people, and I need to stress the word few, who had enough money to leave a heavily bombed city and spend 6 years in relative safety compared with what was happening back home. But the bold fact that more than 11,400 claims were made in respect of war damage to property shows that from 1941 onwards, Torquay was no funk hole. Repeated air raid warnings and civilian casualties made life both dangerous and difficult. Of course, it didn't suffer as badly as Britain's major cities, where 40,000 people lost their lives between September 1940 and May 1941, half of them Londoners. But it didn't escape unscathed either. And Torquay wasn't the only seaside resort to accommodate mainly very elderly people keen to escape the worst of the war. Torbay suffered 642 air raid alerts and 21 major raids. 168 people were killed. A further 158 were seriously wounded, and 392 others also wounded. 137 buildings were totally destroyed. Other serious charges made against the town need to be challenged even today. The old adage, if you throw enough mud, some of it will stick, applies in Torquay's case. By calling the town a funk hole, national newspapers included everyone and everything in their critical columns, which, if more journalistic research and care had been undertaken, would have told a different story. Accusations levelled against the town and its residents included a lack of fundraising, a reluctance to engage in war work, and a failure by a lazy population to volunteer as air raid wardens. These peaked in the summers of 1941 and 1942. Now, while writing the Upton Vale book, one elderly person I interviewed told me that a national newspaper, she didn't know which one, but thought it might be the Daily Mirror, had written a very nasty and terrible article about Torquay. I was determined to find it. Over 4 months online, I read every copy of both the Daily Mirror and the Daily Herald between the outbreak of war in September 1939 and the end of 1942, but to no avail. Then I had one of those eureka moments. There was no Sunday Mirror in those days, but I wondered if that company produced a weekend paper under a different name. It was the first I had heard of the Sunday Pictorial, but there on the 23rd of March 1941 was the offending story. I just knew I had to get a copy. I went online again and at a cost of £48, got one of only 2 copies available. The Pictorial's reporter said he had visited Torquay on the opening day of War Weapons Week and had been distinctly unimpressed by what he saw and heard. Now, War Weapons Week was heavily promoted locally. Companies were not slow to contribute, led by Pearl Assurance, who gave £15,000, the equivalent of £530,000 today. Torquay set itself a target of raising £500,000, but went on to achieve the staggering sum of £881,000, £31 million today in a week, through a mixture of war bonds, gifts and money-raising events. It was more than Exeter raised, but it was not good enough for the Sunday Pictorial. There was no attempt to introduce any evidence, to interview any of the so-called shirkers, or even name any of the hotels where they were staying. The rest of the Sunday Pictorial tirade followed along similar lines. Now, the newspaper's failure to provide any witnesses to back up its accusations didn't stop it from throwing plenty of mud. Typical was a story about an unnamed hotel apparently home to 60 war permanent guests, where it was claimed only 16 of them carried out any fire-watching duties. There was no information as to their ages or mobility. Instead, the reporter commented, and I quote, "Many of them are the most pathetic specimens of humanity I've ever seen. If a bomb dropped on them, it would make no difference. They're dead already." And it continued, "In their fur coats, wearing their vulgar ropes of pearls, they wander into Torquay when the sun shines, moaning because there isn't enough to do, bullying waitresses in the Pavilion Cafe, complaining that the concerts aren't just as they like them. They're always cold. They always have aches and pains. God help them if the Germans win the war. Now, nasty as such comments were, the question of whether such enfeebled residents could climb onto a hotel roof and do fire watching and other civil defence duties might not have provoked much local anger if the newspaper had not then gone on to attack just about everybody else in the town. There was criticism of the local fire brigade, claims of jealousy between Torquay and Paignton hindering civil defence, and a belief that yet more evacuees could be taken in. In the next 4 years, the Daily Mirror in particular, but other newspapers as well, never missed an opportunity to continue their assault on the town. After William Bruce of Queen Street was sentenced to 28 days in prison in September 1944 for not enrolling in the Home Guard, the Mirror pounced. The fact that it was the first case of its kind in 4 years in Torquay was immaterial. The headline a few days later screamed, 3 out of 4 dodge Home Guard service in Torquay. Once again, many people in the town were incensed. It was true that 3 out of 4 men were not in the Home Guard, but for a variety of very good reasons, including the hours they put in doing war work, their age, and their general health. But they weren't dodging anything. There was no attempt by the newspaper to discover how many eligible men were really avoiding doing their duty. Now, it was obvious to the town's Chamber of Trade and Commerce that once the war was over, tourism would remain the largest employer with all its seasonal ups and downs, and that the fun cold label was doing serious damage to the town's reputation. It led Neil Lake, the Chamber of Trade's representative on the council's publicity committee, to urge them to step up their efforts to counter such unjustified attacks, especially considering Torquay's war effort, which he said compared favourably with any other town. And he warned that the town was in danger of becoming the subject of a musical joke. And he knew people who didn't like to say that they came from Torquay. Now, anyone who understood London's tabloid newspapers could have told Mr. Lake he was wasting his time, because by now they were like a dog with a large bone. But now it's time for me to take a short break so we can hear a song written and produced by Ian Churchwood, one of Torquay's many talented musicians, inspired by the book The Funcoal Myth. He recalls a weekend exercise conducted by the Army and Home Guard in 1942, during which Torquay's civilian population largely went about their business. This infuriated the Army more than the antics of the Home Guard. Much to the annoyance of the Army officer in charge, several schoolboys kept the Home Guard posted of troop movements. The Army set off a few blank rounds from their 25-pounders in the harbour and shattered nearby shop windows.
There was a pretend battle in 1942. The Torquay Home Guard knew what they had to do to defend their town from a mock invasion. For the regular army, it was a strange occasion. A weekend-long defense of the town of Torquay. Colin Ross remembers the event quite clearly. The residents of Torquay carried on regardless. The antics of the army were considered harmless. The bunco myth you had better not believe. The national newspapers were out to deceive. The pupils of St. Olaf sided with the Home Guard. For the regular army they had little regard, being quite annoying as they mingled with the troops. The school made spying on the men in many groups. The bunghole myth you had better not believe. The national newspapers were out to deceive. Amongst all the tragedy there was farce, like a scene from Dad's army, good sense was rather sparse. Colin thought the army cheated quite a bit. He remembers how one teacher complained about it. A referee disallowed a Home Guard victory, a successful ambush in the town of Torquay. The bunghole myth you had better not believe. The national newspapers were out to deceive. The national newspapers were out to deceive.
Now this summer, if you take the leisurely trip from Torquay to Brixham on one of the pleasure boats, spare a thought for the men who crossed the English Channel to the French port of Dunkirk in similar, often smaller craft, to rescue the British Army after the disastrous defeat in the Battle of France during the May 1940. Let me set the scene. By April 1940, there were plenty of warning signs that Hitler wasn't going to be satisfied just with his conquest of Poland the previous year. But complacency ruled in Britain, fed by Prime Minister Chamberlain, who at a Conservative Party conference on the 4th of April uttered, not for the first time, some unfortunate words when he said, "Hitler has missed the bus." It was another tragic misjudgment by a man plainly out of his depth. 2 years earlier, he'd come back from Munich claiming Hitler was a man with whom he could do business. Germany immediately annexed Denmark, and by 26th of April, had overrun Norway, where an inadequately resourced and ill-prepared British force had to beat a hasty retreat, although the Navy did sink a number of German ships. Once the full facts were known, what became known as the Norway debacle led to a fierce and at times angry parliamentary debate. Although the Conservatives had a large majority, it was clear Chamberlain had to resign. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, although ironically he had been one of the men who had blundered badly in the planning of the Norway expedition. In another irony, Churchill's daughter Sarah was in Torquay appearing in Gaslight when her father became Prime Minister. When she was told by the Western Morning News reporter of her father's new job, she said, "I'm surprised and very thrilled, but wish it had been under happier circumstances," which totally missed the point that in happier circumstances her father would never have been a member of the government, never mind Prime Minister. Sarah added that the war or no war, she intended to continue her stage career in both Torquay and elsewhere. The same day Churchill became Prime Minister, Germany invaded Holland, Belgium and France. The whole mood in Britain changed overnight. The British intelligence services had not given a single hint as to what Hitler was planning. The day before, MI6 had told the Prime Minister that Germans were going to invade Hungary, not Holland or Belgium. The country was about to pay a heavy price for its complacency. Only one day before Hitler invaded, more than 2.5 million Britons, aged 19 to 36, were told they would be called up for military service, and it wasn't a day too soon. Great Western Railway had no sooner announced that they would be running extra trains from London to Torquay over the Whitsun holiday weekend than the whole timetable was scrapped, and the government announced the whole of the holiday had been abandoned. Not everybody in Torquay's tourism industry approved, but they had to sit up and take note when 3 days after becoming Prime Minister, Churchill told the House of Commons, "I have nothing to offer you but blood, toil, tears and sweat." Now, anyone who followed the lengthy, strictly censored reports in both the Herald and Express, it didn't become the Herald Express until after the Second World War, and the Western Morning News, saw that throughout May 1940, that despite some of the upbeat and outlandish comments by the government, things had gone badly from the start. The next few days brought unmitigated military disaster, and then the miraculous evacuation of 338,000 Allied soldiers, 215,000 of them British, from Dunkirk itself, where they left all their equipment. Two members of staff at the Herald and Express, Albert Luxton of Sherburn Road and William Ward from St James Road, were among the rescued soldiers. Whether they agreed with what their newspaper described as an exciting and memorable experience is a moot point. Albert took part in the fighting retreat from Dunkirk, where he boarded a ship that was bombed and sunk. While struggling in the sea, he and his comrades were machine gunned by German fighters, and he was hit in the leg. He was rescued out of the water and eventually made it back to Britain. William escaped on a fishing boat, which was bombed and then sunk. And when it hit wreckage, as it approached the English coast, he was in the water. He spent 5 hours in the English Channel before being rescued by a Dutch gunboat and brought safely to port. More than 860 vessels of all shapes and sizes crossed the English Channel to bring the men home, of which 243 were sunk. Official records show that only one local boat made the journey to Torquay, from Torquay, the 40-foot, 5-ton pleasure boat, the Lady Cable, skippered by local boatman Frank Gooding from Winchester Avenue, who later was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Now, this little boat earned herself in a place in the history books because she was the very last little ship to leave the Dunkirk beaches. Once she arrived off the coast of France, her shallow draft allowed her to creep close to the shore and bring men backwards and forwards. She transported 630 men from the beaches out to larger ships, which included paddle steamers anchored a mile and a half offshore. All the time she was dodging bombs dropped on her by the Luftwaffe. Frank, when he got home, described the ordeal in graphic terms. He said, "In the half-light I could see wreckage of all kinds. Funnels of boats which had been sunk were stuck up out of the water everywhere. The noise from the large number of planes overhead was deafening. But I managed to get right up on the beach with our stern in the sand. All the soldiers were completely exhausted and had hardly enough strength to hang on when they got aboard. They were absolutely dead beat." Once her work was done, the Lady Cable returned to Dover. She spent the next 6 years helping the Navy at Devonport and the naval base there, returning to Torquay in 1946 to continue ferrying passengers around Torbay. In 2003, she ran into a storm and legal battle over her future. Separate trusts tried to raise more than £300,000 to restore her to her former glory. But 2 lottery bids failed, and as the boat's condition deteriorated, the different factions could not agree on the best way forward. Enough money was raised to stabilise her and pay for a new keel, which was fitted at Totnes. But collecting tins, donations and concerts alone were never going to raise the money required. One of the trusts thought it had found the perfect answer in 2015, when the National Maritime Museum offered to restore and then use her as a flagship tour boat in Falmouth. But the other trust vetoed the plan, claiming the Lady Cable had to stay in Torbay. There were threats of legal action if the boat was moved to Cornwall. So today she sits in a painting garden under cover, looking much the worse for the wear, with nobody knowing what her future will be. It's very sad. Hopefully a common sense solution will be found sooner rather than later. The rescue of so many men from the beaches in what was described as the miracle of Dunkirk was a truly heroic effort. But as Churchill admitted, you don't win wars with evacuations. It stirred the nation, though, and helped create a defiant spirit, which was going to be badly needed in the coming months. Britain and her empire were alone.
At Dunkirk there was danger from the sky, port and starboard, skippered by Frank Gooding, she'd sail from Torquay's harbour. These for our time, Chamberlain had said, but from Dunkirk, good Lord, how we fled. At Dunkirk there was danger from the sky, stern and starboard, called the Lady Cable, she'd sail from Torquay's harbour. Hitler's missed the bus, Chamberlain had said, but at Dunkirk, you know, we left so many dead. In peacetime she would sail around Torbay, ferrying passengers for many a happy day. At Dunkirk she crept close to the shore, rescued 600 men and some 30 more. At Dunkirk there was danger from above, port and starboard, called the Lady Cable, she'd sail from Torquay's harbour. Peace for our time, Chamberlain had said, but from Dunkirk, good Lord, how we fled. Hitler's missed the bus, Chamberlain had said, but at Dunkirk, you know, we left so many dead.
Let us turn the clock back a few years to 1917 to be precise, when the First World War was not going well for the Allies and daily casualty lists were horrendous. Those men suspected of avoiding their patriotic duty were being vilified. Street assaults became so common that a silver war badge needed to be issued to men who were not eligible for military service or who had been discharged. Suffragettes in particular were very enthusiastic patriots. Torquay had a very active women's suffrage movement, and they were the ones who handed out the white feathers. One such recipient was Arnold Ridley, who would later become better known for his role as Private Charles Godfrey in the classic TV series Dad's Army. Now, Arnold fought for more than a year on the front line. He went over the top at the Battle of the Somme and was wounded 3 times, bayoneted in the groin, and lived for the rest of his life with shrapnel in his legs. He suffered from shell shock, blackouts, and terrible nightmares until his death in 1984. Yet in Torquay in 1917, Arnold was handed a white feather by a tall young woman wearing a fox fur. She didn't realise that he had served with courage. He took the white feather without comment, and later when he was asked why, he answered, "I wasn't wearing my soldier's discharge badge. I didn't want to advertise the fact that I was a wounded soldier. I used to carry it in my pocket." Arnold spent a year teaching at Torquay Boys Grammar School, where he was games master. But he left Torquay when a female teacher turned down his proposal of marriage. He rejoined the army at the outbreak of World War II, only to be discharged on medical grounds a year later, after seeing active service in France. He became an active member of the Home Guard, which stood him in good stead when asked to play Private Godfrey in the television series. Let's fast forward now to July 1940, when Britain stood alone against Hitler and the Nazis. Little had changed. A sign of how anyone who showed any sign of giving less than 100% to the war effort, or dared voice any opinion which smacked of appeasement, was regarded, came when Torquay Council sacked 2 teachers at Audley Park School because they were former, and I stress former, members of the Peace Pledge Union, an organisation which only 2 years before had supported Prime Minister Chamberlain when he came back from Munich and uttered those infamous words, "Peace for our time." The union is still in existence today and promotes pacifism. There was little tolerance or goodwill towards such thinking at Torquay Council. It was claimed the 2 teachers had taught the subject, but this was hotly denied. During one febrile debate, one councillor called them traitors without producing any evidence. When a petition with strong support from both parents and teachers calling for the 2 men to be reinstated was submitted, the council debated the matter but refused to back down, despite letters in all the local papers. The Herald and Express said there was not one shred of evidence against the men which would satisfy even a Nazi court. And the editor added, "It's the most un-English thing I've ever heard of." But one councillor who was not swayed was Councillor Robert Narracott, who said, "I hope the council will not be led astray by sentiment. Why should we tolerate such people in our town?" And he threatened to bring other names to the council in the future. But he never got the chance to out these people, because 5 weeks later, on his way home from a council meeting, he collapsed in the street and died. But some people simply invited trouble. When the vicar at St John's Church, the Reverend Robert Boggis, called Hitler a great man while speaking at a Torquay Debating Society meeting early in 1941, it provoked a storm of protest in the town. He said Hitler proved himself the greatest man of all time by his reorganisation of Germany and its rehabilitation of a powerful nation following its collapse after the Great War. And that it was marvellous that such a man, starting with no advantage in life, could raise himself to the great pinnacle on which he now stands. He said he had lifted the whole German nation. Now, to call such comments insensitive in a time when the country was going through much suffering and the weekly death toll among forces personnel and merchant seamen was rising would be a massive understatement. And newspapers were swamped with angry letters. The hapless minister replied to his many critics from both the pulpit and in letters to various newspapers by trying to explain the difference between great and good. He said he did not reckon Hitler among the good and did not condone Hitler's cruelties, but then went on to add fuel to the fires he had already lit by saying that Hitler has set Germany on its feet, inspired it with hope and ambition, re-established its industries, built up the strongest army that had ever existed, so that he and his people are now recognised as one of the great forces in the world. He concluded, "Of course, I don't applaud his methods, but I can quite understand his gaining the gratitude of the Germans, even those who are anti-Nazis. I go as far as to say from this pulpit that his nation ought to be grateful to him." The passing of time has not diminished both the dismay and anger his words caused both locally and nationally. And it came back to haunt him a little bit later when his own son was killed in a bombing raid on Germany. 1941 was also the year when Torquay's greatest benefactor died. Ella Marion Rowcroft was a freeman of Torquay, a rare honour for a woman of that time. It was thanks to her generosity that Torbay Hospital opened in 1928. 3 years before her death, she had gifted her 22-acre estate at the back of Tor railway station to a trust and turned it into a convalescent home with an endowment of £100,000, nearly £5 million today. Nowadays it is the site of Rowcroft Hospice, which opened in 1982. Less well known is that Ella paid for the Torquay Mayor's chain, which is set with diamonds and rubies and is still used today. Now it's time for another of Ian's excellent songs.
The suffragettes are busy in the town of Torquay, handing out white feathers to the men that they see. Yes, handing out white feathers to the men that they see. Mr. Hindenburg had to change his name. Anti-German sentiment and spies are to blame. A local Austrian arrested on his wedding day. Such paranoia was rife all around Torbay. The suffragettes are busy in the town of Torquay, handing out white feathers to the men that they see. Yes, handing out white feathers to the men that they see. Arnold Ridley was a teacher at a Torquay school, received a white feather, which was rather cruel, seen by a suffragette who wore a fox fur. His silver war badge he didn't show to her. Wounded 3 times in the First World War, Arnold fought out the Somme with great power. The suffragettes so busy in the town of Torquay, handing out white feathers to the men that they see. Yes, handing out white feathers to the men that they see.
I want to conclude my part of today's programme by telling you a few short stories which fit in well with the title Torquay's Hidden History. After the initial rush of evacuees, when everyone thought all Britain's major cities were bound to be bombed soon, it was the evacuation of an entire London school to Torquay on 13th of October 1939 that first placed the initial strain on local resources. 400 pupils from St Olave's and St Saviour's School, then based near Tower Bridge, gathered on Paddington Station for their journey to the West Country. It must have been quite a sight as the boys stood there with their label and gas masks round their necks, anxious and often tearful parents giving them last hugs. Schooling took place at Torquay Boys Grammar School, then situated in Barton Road, with the local lads attending lessons in the morning and late afternoon, and the St Olave's pupils utilising the times in between and later. 3 months later, 250 pupils from Paddington and Maida Vale Girls High School were evacuated to Torquay and did their schooling at the Girls Grammar School. From everything I discovered when writing the funk hole myth, most evacuees were treated well, although some families insisted that on a Sunday they had to go outdoors after breakfast and remain there until evening mealtime. Many simply walked the streets. Different sports were popular during the war, but were banned in the main. The Football Association declared at the outbreak of war that football, as it was then organised, couldn't continue. This is in contrast to 1914, when professional football had continued during the first year of the war. But in 1939, the threat of an air attack and conscription made it impossible for football to continue as it had done before. However, regional leagues were organised and crowds were impressive. For the amateur golfer, the danger of walking on a beach or an area which had been bombed or mined was illustrated by the story of a golfer further along the south coast who drove his ball into a sandy area, took his lofted club with him, played his shot, and all that remained visible of him afterwards was the ball which had returned safely to the green. Torquay Council did its best to exasperate local sportsmen. In early August 1941, putting greens were opened on Sundays, but a month later the council voted not to allow tennis courts or bowling greens to be open on that day. As one local wit noted, you can now harry a golf ball in Torquay on a Sunday, but woods and tennis balls are strictly forbidden. When the war was declared, the council had to manage many of the directives being issued by central government concerning what people should do if there was an invasion. But one of the first decisions the council made, which will strike a chord with many people today, was that after a serious debate, they quickly agreed to buy 9 flashlights for car park attendants with subdued lights to ensure that they could issue tickets in the blackout. Even in those days, the council weren't going to miss out on any revenues from car parking. Little did they know that when petrol rationing came in, there would be few cars for their attendants to monitor. The terrible bombing of St Mary Church on Sunday the 30th of May 1943, when 21 children and 3 adults were killed while attending a special afternoon service at the parish church, has gone down as the most shocking local air raid of the war. There were other casualties that day, including 16-year-old Clifford Cooksley, who lived with his parents at 22 Princess Street. He was killed instantly when a bomb scored a direct hit as he was entering his home. He was a civil defence messenger boy. Today, the land on which the bomb terraced houses in Princess Street stood is a small municipal car park, and the street is best known for Hanbury's fish and chip shop. What many people might not know is that in 2009, Torbay Civic Society erected a blue plaque in Clifford's memory, and thus he became the country's youngest ever recipient of such an award. And I've left a Civic Society leaflet about Clifford on the table for anybody to take when you leave. A further 19 people were killed across Torbay that sunny May Day when the Fokker-Wulf fighter bombers roared in at sea level, while several people had incredible escapes. St Mary Church's vicar, the Reverend John Johnson, was in the parish church getting ready for the children's service when he realised he had forgotten his glasses. It took 3 minutes for him to walk to the front door of the vicarage. Just as he opened the front door, a bomb dropped. He was flung down the passageway, but not badly hurt. Another lucky man was credit draper Albert Collins. He was machine gunned while walking to his home in Parkhurst Road. When he got safely inside, he took off his coat and a still warm bullet dropped out of his clothing and onto the floor. It had deflected off a penknife and bone toothpick he kept in his waistcoat pocket, which was directly over his heart. It goes to show what a fine line there was between life and death during the war in Torquay. One of the more remarkable untold stories I came across while interviewing more than 50 people for the book was a hospitality shown towards German and Italian prisoners in 1945 by people like Len and Edith Gibbings, who lived in Windsor Road. They were one of a number of Torquay families who were happy to have a prisoner of war round for a chat and a cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon, arranged by the local Salvation Army. By 1945, most prisoners were happy to accept their lot and see out the war in relative comfort, compared with their comrades fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front. I never did find out if the MI5 had an office in St Mary Church, but several people said there was one hidden away. I would love to hear from anyone who has more information, unless, of course, that is still covered by the Official Secrets Act, and the office is still in use. Not everybody subscribed to the popular myth in many wartime films that everyone was pulling together for the war effort. Crime rates soared in many towns. When caught, the culprits were dealt with severely. What I did notice while doing my research was a big increase in bigamy cases. In 1942, one woman who had recently got married at St Messiah's Church had a nasty shock when her husband's real wife turned up on the doorstep. The husband had persuaded her to go and stay with her mother and father in Harrow for the duration of the war, claiming it would be safer there. When the bigamist appeared in front of Torquay magistrates prior to being sent for a full trial, he told them he would rather spend time in jail than live with that woman again. He duly had his wish granted later in the year when he was jailed for 12 months. In early 1944, South Devon went through a dramatic change. Almost overnight, the whole Torbay area was filled to bursting point with American soldiers. Camps sprang up all round the outskirts of the town, and the grey car garage in Torwood Street became a PX, an American Forces supermarket. The bay was soon full of naval ships, both British and American. Billeting was compulsory, with heavy penalties if anyone resisted. And every home owner was given written guidance on what to expect if soldiers were billeted on them. The Americans, for their part, were given some detailed advice about what to expect when they landed in Britain, including making friends with the native population and not to fight all wars. This was particularly directed at Irish Americans. The American troops were reminded that they and the British spoke the same language. Really? But they were warned also that the locals don't know how to make a good cup of coffee, while Americans don't know how to make a good cup of tea. For many Torquayans, it was their first contact with a man with a different colour. And finally, after what had happened in Holland in May 1940, there was a real fear that paratroopers would land in South Devon and that spies were regularly being dropped by parachute. This kept the Home Guard particularly busy, but it also brought its lighter moments. One dark night, a woman in Rowley Road reported that a wounded paratrooper had landed in her garden. The Home Guard duly rushed to the scene, only to find that the noise she was complaining about was being created by two hedgehogs who were mating. Thank you for being such an attentive audience. There's much more I could tell you about life in Torquay during World War II, along with the reasons why German Ambassador Joachim von Ribbentrop and the future Lord Haw came to the town in 1937. But to learn more, you will need to read the two books, The Funk Hole Myth and Operation Seagull, which are on the table right. Both Ian and I will be available later in the afternoon to take some questions from the audience. Please keep them short and to the point, and now enjoy the rest of the programme. Thank you.
Wow, what can you say? Every time I hear these stories from David, it's absolutely, truly amazing. Before I bring on Martin in a second, just a few things. As you've heard, we're going to have Q&As. We've got to keep it short. There's so many questions I'm sure you want to get out. We're on a time limit to close the show. We've got to have the theatre vacated completely by 3 o'clock. There are feedback forms. We would greatly appreciate if you could fill them in so we know what you want. If we get a chance to have this theatre again, perhaps we can put something else on, or perhaps something you want in your community. We'll do our damnedest to work with you as community, with our community builders, and with the Torquay Community Development Trust. Without further ado, a great man, energy, vibrant. I won't nick his hashtag line. Martin Harris from the Unleash Theatre Company.
Thank you, David. My goodness, what an introduction. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here today to talk to you about Unleashed Theatre Company, and particularly talk about Unleashed Theatre Company's link with Torquay's hidden history. You might have seen in the papers and on the telly recently that Unleashed Theatre Company, my goodness, have had lots of really great news. We recently won an award at the Cannes Film Festival for a film we made last year called The Rich and the Pure, which was about a period in Torquay's Victorian history. And you might have seen as well that we have also just bought the Central Cinema on Abbey Road, which we are reverting back to the Royal Lyceum Theatre and making it back into a theatre. And that in itself, which I'll come on to, has incredible links with Torquay's hidden history. So it was fantastic, very interesting to hear David's talk about the First World War, Second World War. My goodness, how interesting. Particularly, I love the bit about Winston Churchill's daughter who was appearing in Gaslight. I wonder whether she was appearing at our theatre, at the Royal Lyceum. So some of you might not have heard of Unleashed Theatre Company. Unleashed Theatre Company, my goodness, has been going in various different forms since really 21 years ago. That's when it started. That was the very first time that a sort of rag bag of disparate actors appeared on the Little Theatre's stage, where we did a modern-day version of St John's Gospel. And the reason being is that Unleashed Theatre Company is primarily a Christian theatre company. It was set up with the sole purpose of bringing Christians together from different churches and giving them opportunity to put on, use the performing arts to put on productions that had a real message of hope for people. My feeling has always been that, I'm a Christian. That's the very thing that motivates my whole life. And yet, say to people, do you want to come on to church? Not really, bit boring. Not for me. If you want to say to someone, hey, how'd you fancy coming to the theatre? And we'll go to the pub afterwards and we'll talk about it. Much more interesting. And so that's really how Unleashed Theatre Company really started. It was started as a theatre company that really was putting on stuff that was had a real message of hope. So after about 3 or 4 productions, we were commissioned by Buckfast Abbey, which is a Benedictine order of monks over at Buckfast Abbey, and they commissioned us to do their summer outreach. So we did one production in the open air, which was called What's So Amazing About Grace, based on a fantastic book by Philip Yancey. And after that, it just became essentially a 10-year tenure. We ended up doing 10 years at Buckfast Abbey. And it was during that time that we became Unleashed Theatre Company. Like I said, I myself was a street pastor for 10 years. And we used to go out on the streets every Friday and Saturday night. You volunteer and you do it once a month. And in 2014, which was during the sort of decade of austerity, really, there was a massive spike in the number of homeless people that we were sort of helping and reaching out to. So, you go out on a Friday or Saturday night, 2 o'clock in the morning, you might perhaps see 2 homeless people sat in a doorway. Literally 2014, you'd go out and there'd be like perhaps 10, 15. It's just awful, With all the cuts, a lot of the services that stop people from really falling through the cracks and becoming homeless were all cut, and people were really becoming homeless. So I started volunteering at the Leonard Stocks Homeless Centre, literally just to do workshops to really help people have a glimmer of hope that actually they could get back to a life that was worth living. So we do these workshops, and it was to sort of help them with their confidence. And a lady from Shrublands, which is the alcohol and drug unit, came and sat in one of those workshops. And she said, Martin, I could get you funding for more people to access this sort of work. So it was fantastic. We got some funding and we moved it into Endeavour House, which is run by Shekinah. We started running these workshops for people who, were ex-homeless or in recovery on a 12-step program, struggling with addiction. And we've been going, so we set up what was called Unleashed Community Drama, which was a separate arm to what we do to Unleashed Theatre Company. So Unleashed Theatre Company was a Christian theatre company. Unleashed Community Drama became, if you like, our social action project. And it's been going ever since. It's been going and working and developing. And every week we get between 25, 30 people coming to a workshop every week. 51 weeks of the year, and that's sort of grown. You're probably thinking, how does the rich and the pure fit into what we do? Well, we have links with a lot of the recovery agencies in Torbay, so like Path, who go out on the streets and they have a food bank. Mary Mags, they run a food bank, but they also run the Living Room, which has been going 10 years, which is basically a free cafe, reaching out to people who are vulnerable, people who perhaps got nowhere to go, or ex-homeless, and they do a fantastic work. So we had really good links with Mary Mags, as we do with Shrublands, Walnut Lodge. And Mary Mags, about 3 years ago, they set up a thing called the Inspire Project, which was primarily a bid through the National Heritage Lottery Fund to get money to actually work on their fabric of their building, like all these old buildings, the spire needed looking at and stuff was leaking, all that sort of stuff. So as part of that bid, they had to do a community engagement project. And so they commissioned Unleashed Theatre Company to write a heritage piece about the history of the church. And now that church is really interesting because it was the very first church in Torbay that had what was called unappropriated pews. I knew nothing about it until we were commissioned to do this project. So interesting, whereby what happened was with the Napoleonic Wars, people stopped going on their grand tours at the beginning of the 19th century. And so they started coming down to Torbay. And so lots of rich people, lots of poor people, ill people would come down to Torbay. And they started moving here, building up their villas, and they started coming to church. And what they would do is they would pay for their own pew. And so basically what was happening was that gradually the poor people were being squeezed out of church because they didn't have a pew. And so this guy called Charles Dawson saw this happening. And so he specifically commissioned a church to be built that had unappropriated pews, which meant the poor people could go to church and they didn't have to, be not let in, or they had nowhere to sit because the rich people who were coming into the bay had bought their own pew. It was a scandal. It was a real scandal. So we were then commissioned to write a heritage piece about that story. So that's how the Rich and the Pure came about. They had an Inspire Project research group who did a lot of the research. And then we, as Unleashed Community Drama, we were meant to be doing a 40-minute little playlet that we would do on a Heritage Day, perhaps on a rolling programme. But because of the pandemic, we ended up making probably what was the most ambitious project we've ever done, which was a full-scale, hours-long costume drama called The Rich and the Pure, about the bread riots, the cholera epidemic, and specifically around the unappropriated pews and how St Mary Mag's Church came into being. So we're going to look at now the trailer for that, and then I'll tell you a little bit about it.
I've been coming to this church all my life. What do you mean there are no places available?
I want to change my will.
How are we supposed to live like this with our menfolk banged up and next to jail?
If ever I saw the haunting gaze of death in a child's eye.
You want to see squalor? You won't see nothing like this in your fancy tourist guide. Follow me.
I will not be defied. Take this subpoena. You will deliver it.
I'm not going to stand by and let this happen. We need a call to action.
Oh my, it's a body.
So that's just a trailer of the film that we made. And then, unbelievably, we made it in literally 6 weeks while the pandemic was still happening. And we made it all over Torbay, in all the places where a lot of these things happened. It included Bishop Philpotts, who was the rotter of the piece, who a lot of people who know about Bishop Philpotts, he really was a nasty piece of work. And Mark's here, who played him. But we took in, basically the way in which we wrote it was that we took a lot of the local history, like the cholera epidemic that tied in with obviously the pandemic, the bread riots because of the Ireland potato famine. There was, because there was a lack of potatoes, the flour went up in price, and so a lot of people were really going hungry. And there were riots in Torbay, and they read the Riot Act in Torquay for the first time because people were just starving. And there was this massive gap between the rich and the poor, these massive, great big villas up in the Lincolns, and then people absolutely living in squalor in Pimlico and George Street. And so what we did was we came up with this idea of finding a character or writing a character that would bring the threads of all these stories together, and the link between each of them, brought together the whole storyline. And it was based on a girl called Annie Davey, who's actually buried in St Mary Mag's churchyard by the bell tower, but nothing is known about her. And it fitted in absolutely perfectly. So nothing was known about her, but we created this whole character, Annie Davey, and rewrote her story. Stephanie's here in a second. She'll tell you a little bit about it. Anyway, the upshot being was it became this massive project, which then went on to, I didn't know, my administrator put it in for a load of film awards. I didn't even know it'd been put in for them. And we ended up being shortlisted for the best short film at the London Shorts Film Festival in the autumn. And then earlier this year, we heard that we'd actually won best screenplay at the Cannes Film Festival. I tell you, it's absolutely insane because every single person pretty much within that thing, apart from there was, I think, a couple of characters, were either all in recovery or they had some, they were struggling with some sort of addiction or, had had massive challenges in their life. So it was such a massive achievement for them. And for them to be, if you like, elevated and be honoured, because it's flipping good. It's such an achievement. So I'm going to show you now a little bit from a documentary that was made about the making of that film, because you'll probably see, all the places that we filmed in Torbay. So let's see the next bit, which is it's a tiny section of the documentary that we made.
I had a very clear vision of what I wanted the film to look like, and we wanted to use local locations. So we took the film crew on all the places where I wanted to film, and it was fantastic. Beacon Cove, Thatcher Point, Hesketh Terrace, and we were able to actually get permission for all of these places to film.
My small contribution towards the film really was working with Martin and sourcing the locations that we were going to use for the production. Martin really had identified a lot of the locations that he wanted or ideas that he had, and together as a team we approached those locations to see if they would let us film there.
He can remove or cover or whatever to modern books. Do you know, sat in a window seat here, looking out. Have you read this type of thing? And it's like a close-up.
We can film one this way,
yep.
The other one that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Firstly, with the pandemic and everything, a lot of the locations, or some of the locations, were a bit hesitant about allowing us on their property. Bygones was one of them. We were hoping to film a scene in their Victorian Street, but understandably they were a bit unwilling to let us in. So we had to source somewhere else.
I'd like to shoot from that way.
This way, yeah. But I think it's ideal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Darker. Lit. The idea is, he can get up from his chair.
Yeah.
We could have one of the candles.
You can have one in the corner, right?
But on the other side, a lot of the outdoor locations like Hesketh Crescent and Cockington, they were more than willing to allow us to record there as long as we stuck to COVID regulations and had our risk assessments filled out. So they were very willing. The council also was very willing. We made small contributions to anyone that requested it.
Cut to them walking around the corner. Where this is the bit where Stephanie and Annie and Molly, she's been taken in by a cousin. That's absolutely fab. And you know, doing the whole scene here in this corner.
Yeah.
And then she's that side, and then bring up the chair for the solicitor. Lovely.
Originally, we were hoping to start filming just before Christmas or in January, but then as the second lockdown came in, a lot of the plans and organisation that we'd made into starting filming had to be shifted into the March, which thankfully actually probably worked out a little bit better because of the weather. So what on paper sounded like a quite simple process, there was a lot of behind the scenes work that went into that, but everything was successful.
I came up with the idea of approaching street pastors who were really accommodating, let us borrow their street pastor's van. And so while our actors weren't particularly in a particular part of the scene, they could sit on the street pastor's van, which acted almost like a sort of mobile green room, which really worked well. We had originally drawn up a schedule that lasted 2 months, but with the second lockdown, we ended up having to actually condense the whole filming into 6 weeks, just over a month, which was a lot of work. We had to reschedule all the locations and make sure we were able to have permissions for everything. We did everything under proper COVID rules. We tried to make sure that everyone socially distanced, that when they weren't acting, they wore masks. We invested heavily in a really good cinematographer. Johnny Finnis Films came highly recommended, and oh my goodness, what an amazing guy he was. I mean, literally the product that we've ended up with, I think, is so fantastic because of his professionalism. All our guys, massive achievement if you think that some of them have never acted. All of them pretty much are in recovery. All of them have incredible stories to tell on a journey of rehabilitation. And so it was a really big step up for them to really step up to the plate and to act in public. Tristram Adams, we've worked with him before. He was the guy who brought in with the drone. Lovely guy, and he did all the drone work for us. He's a local cameraman who does weddings, and my goodness, it just really added such a great dimension to a lot of the transition shots. We started very early on in the morning. We normally started filming at 8:30, so we didn't have a lot of general public rubbernecking. We were really fortunate over those 6 weeks to have really good weather.
To say, sorry Annie, there are no places available today.
There's no places available today.
We used Churston Church as a double up for St Saviour's because we felt that St Lucius Street was too public.
It may not be much.
You can come in.
Stephanie, our lead, was incredible. If you think that she's never done any acting, even in our previous productions, she just really came up trumps.
Slowly.
John Aggott, who played Charles Dawson, great actor. Funny thing was when we first approached Chris Hodson from Churston Court about hiring a four-poster bed. When we firstly made the approach and said we wanted to hire a four-poster bed for an afternoon for a private film, I think he got the wrong impression and thought we were filming a porno.
He's a very popular film.
No.
We filmed at a big house up at the Lincolns, which was really fantastic. A friend of mine owns this amazing house, which is like stepping back in time with lots of Victorian memorabilia. We hardly had to do any set dressing for the scenes with William Kitson and Lawrence Polk.
All the concerns that are raised at the briefing aim. Plain Chancellor in the East End, which is somewhere.
Am I seeing?
We took over a street at the back of the Merlin in Torquay High Street. I think when the cast walked down from St Mary Mag's, they were shocked at how authentic it looked. And again, we were really blessed with fantastic weather. The lighting was fab. Again, we got up really early. We had everyone on set by 8:30. We just didn't want to waste the light, and we also wanted to avoid lots of people, again, rubbernecking what we were doing.
Watch where you're throwing that.
Which we cordoned off with bins, and we spent a lot of time trying to make it really authentic. We went there very early, painted over a lot of the graffiti. We got a load of horse dung, straw, and we made these fantastic lines of laundry, which just really brought the scene to life. We borrowed a lot of the props from Toads, who were really helpful, Anne Jordan and her team. Barrels, wheelbarrows, just looked fantastic.
Close their doors in the big comfortable houses, and we don't exist.
We spent a day at Churston Court. As I said, Chris Hodson was really helpful, opened up the hotel, which of course was shut, for us to use, which we used for the interior of the vicarage shot, the exterior of the vicarage shot. We used a few extras. Folk came in from our action team to sort of dress, but on the whole we did a couple of big ensemble scenes. Olga Petrova's scene was a great scene. This part was written specifically for Alla, who's one of our pillars in our group. She's a wonderful lady and she is Russian, so it was great to write that part specifically for her.
Foreigner, is it? I see.
She wants to tell our story.
That's all the way from London.
Annie here.
Baby, you should see her other children.
He puts his face into action, that man. We love.
Okay, so we are, if you want to come and see it, we have got a What's On brochure for all our events, which is coming up. We are doing a public screening of that in August, so you would be very, very welcome to come up. I'm going to ask actually Mark Tootle and Stephanie to come up. James, you can come as well, mate, that's fine. They've got the 2 awards that we won, and I'm just going to ask them very briefly a couple of questions. So guys, do come up. Stephanie played our lead, she played Anne Davey. Mark Tootle played the evil Bishop Philpotts. And Paul James, he played a very important role because he was the guy who initially didn't let Anne Davey in. And then we did a lovely touch at the end where, when the church was built at St Mary Mag's, that Anne Davey, she was actually given, we wrote that she became the sort of the welcomer, and she welcomed everyone in. And the wonderful thing about it is that St Mary Mag's, I think, is a really significant church in Torbay, because all the churches are fab. You know, we work with anyone, and as a Christian theatre company, we work regardless of denomination. But I think St Mary Mag's is really different in that if you think the origins of it were that they were the church that stood out and welcomed everyone in, and they really worked with the poor. The guy, Richard Wolfe, who was the vicar, he turned down a really, really rich incumbency in Kensington when he saw the poverty of Torbay, and he came down here to take on that role. And it still is a church, lots of churches doing fantastic stuff, but it's exemplary in their work with the living room and working with the guys on the edge and the homeless. So Stephanie, do come over here. So this is Stephanie, who played Anne Davey. Who's holding, look, Cannes Film Festival. London Short Film Festival. Right, Stephanie, one question. Now, you'd obviously never done stuff with us before. You came along literally just for the donuts, didn't you? And so, although you've been with us a long time, you specifically wanted this role when we walked. Why was that? Oh, why was that?
Because I started to morph into Annie, so I realised that my character and Annie's character were very similar. I myself, in fact, became homeless after having my own home for 26 years. And then I became the cleaner at St Mary Mag's, which was a real massive turnaround. Because having lost it all, I then was humbled enough to want to help the church. It sort of brought my heart alive to love and care for people in the church. So, and I hate injustice. I hate the injustice of someone being homeless and having nowhere to go.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Now, Mark, you played Bishop Philpotts. Now, Mark is he's a writer, an actor. He's been with us many years. He actually is on the team, but obviously comes from a background that's similar to that. But you are a fantastic comedian. What was it like when you got the part of Bishop Philpotts, which really was quite a sort of character part, and he really was not a nice piece of work, was he?
Oh, absolutely not. No, definitely. No, when I first got the part, I did a little bit of research, and when I was reading through, 2 words instantly sprung to mind: aggrandising and polemic. He was very, very power-orientated. Initially hailing from Durham when he was ordained. He had 4 livings there inside 10 years as a clergyman. He spent nearly £1 million on Bishop's Stowe, which was on the Babbacombe Road. And,
the Old Palace Theatre.
The Old Palace, that's the one, absolutely,
hotel.
yes. And he was a renowned polemicist. He loved a good argument, and I think in modern day parlance we could genuinely class him as a Rottweiler. And I just loved it. It was the first time I'd ever done a really in-depth character, so I did, as I say, I did the research, and I gave it my best shot. But I did get plenty of satisfaction because I did actually grow my own Victorian mutton chops which was really quite hard work, but well worth it in the end.
Great, thank you so much. Do take a seat, guys, do take a seat. Well, in terms of hidden history, the next chapter of Unleashed is really very exciting because sort of on the back of that, we were given a fantastic gift which has enabled us to buy the Central Cinema, which, as you know, Merlin have opened up the big centre where British Home Stores was, a big multiplex. And so they were moving out of the Central Cinema in Abbey Road, and we were approached by them, asked whether we'd like to buy them. They knew we were looking for permanent premises because we spent a lot of money on rents and storage. And the upshot is that we were able to buy the Abbey Road cinema. Now, the fantastic thing about this is that it is, in fact, the oldest cinema, the oldest theatre in Torbay. It was opened in 1880 as the Royal Opera House and Lyceum. And it's got an incredible history because before that it was assembly rooms, and Charles Dickens appeared there on his tour reading Pickwick Papers. Oscar Wilde appeared there when he was staying in Babbacombe writing The Woman of No Importance. Dawley Cart, who was the theatrical impresario who brought Gilbert and Sullivan together, they went on tour regularly and they came down to Torbay and they appeared at the Royal Lyceum. And in fact, it was while they were here that they had to put on an impromptu performance of The Pirates of Penzance in order to retain the copyright in this country, because it was opening on in Broadway, because in America, when they put on HMS Pinafore, they didn't secure the copyright, and so people were just doing their own thing with it. It's a really interesting story, really interesting story. Agatha Christie, I wrote a book about Agatha Christie with Matthew Pritchard a few years back, the official guide to Agatha Christie in Devon, and going through her archives, and I knew that she went there every week of her life. Her older brother and sister took her there every week. So this place is absolutely dripping with heritage and history, and we are taking it back to, we've just called it the Royal Lyceum Theatre, which is its original name, and we are reverting it back to a theatre, but not a theatre in the sense that, like this, which I know Colin Matthews has got an amazing thing going here, it's fab. But really it's going to be a centre, a hub for restoration, for recovery. So that we have Unleashed Theatre Company, which is our theatre company. We have Unleashed Community Drama, which is a beautiful community drama group for people who are in recovery. We 4 years ago, on the back of Under One Roof, we launched the Unleashed Community Choir. And next month, in our own building, we are launching the Unleashed Community Youth Choir. And, our heart is to build and to redevelop downstairs into an arts centre for the community, which will be, if you like, a beacon in one of the poorest areas in Torbay, as a place where people can come and they can engage with the arts, the performing arts, and they can, the performing arts will be used to actually bring people back into it, give them opportunity to, see their potential unleashed. That's what Unleashed is about. So stopped even earlier. Go on, how about that? Fab, eh? Thank you so much for listening. Can I just really encourage you to take one of our What's On brochures. We do have also a brochure which is called Become a Friend. If you've been perhaps, thought, wow, this is such a great thing, what Unleashed is trying to do, we see real recovery in people. We see transformation in people. Through them engaging through the performing arts. I think the fact that we received these 2 awards it's like living in a sort of like virtual parallel universe. I really can't believe it. What, you mean you got your own? So we did this like rather bad production of John's Gospel 21 years ago at the Little Theatre, which was really under-rehearsed, but we were really... Since then, we've learned so much. If you said to me 21 years ago, Martin, in 21 years' time, you will have your own theatre and you'll be running like 4 theatre, groups, you could have blown me over. I mean, it's mental. It's completely mental. So if you feel perhaps prompted to take one of our, become a friend of ours, you'll be doing something really positive for the community, because it's not just about theatre. It's not just about keeping live theatre alive. It's also about, we now have saved that lovely old building, which is actually part of Torbay's heritage, and make it into something that's going to be really positive for our community. Then please do sign up. It's 60 quid a year. And, if loads of people did that, that would really help us. We're a charity. We rely on the goodwill of people who support us. Thank you very much.
Wow, what can you say to that? Dynamic, energy, every town in the country could do with a Martin. Yeah? I've been lucky enough to be in one of these productions, and I know several members of the auditorium here came along to see it. It's energy, it's dynamic, no one's judged, just really good. We're going to have a Q&A now. As I said, we're short on time, so we're going to have a Q&A. I think Amanda's going to be our mic lady, community builder for Babbacombe St Mary Church and Maidencoombe. Down on to your left, we have books and CDs if you want to purchase. But like I say, we've got to turn around this theatre and give it them back fairly promptly. So have we got any questions? Hands? No? We're going to finish. There you go, lady over here. We'll get someone started.
I don't really want to ask a question, except that I used to work in what was the Odeon Cinema, which you are now taking over. And I recall when on a Saturday and Sunday night for the evening performance, people used to really dress. So that's how far that goes back. But I really wanted to speak just for 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the programme to the gentleman that's historical, that gave us the historical bit about the war years, because I've 1 or 2 things that may or may not be of interest to him. But I don't want to actually ask questions when other people might be waiting.
Right. Anyone else? I'm sure there must be some questions. Up the top there, at the very back, I think what we've got to mention, dear old Bishop Philpox is buried up in St Mary Church Parish Church. Thank you, Meg, yeah? Come on, Amanda, run.
Hi, I'd just love to say that the Unleashed project sounds fabulous. And whilst I'm more than happy to give you 60 quid for a year to support you, are there other ways in which we can get involved and support?
We had a public consultation a few weeks ago where we were people who want to volunteer. Yeah, we are growing, we're doing more stuff. So if you want to be a volunteer, then please go and have a look at our website, which is unleashedtheatrecompany.com, and there is an email that you can email and say, yes, I'm interested in volunteering. And there will be things like marshalling, catering, there's lots of ways that people can get practically involved. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Come on, down here at the front. Run, run, run. So you're working off that lunch.
Hello. I was interested in that film just now, and I saw my mum and dad's house on Totnes Road, and I know like they're up for sale now. I suppose I wouldn't like to see them get knocked down because they're over 100 years old. No.
They are, well, weirdly, but we did a shot where Anne Davy and her friend, they come down the stairs. We actually tried to get hold because they're both empty, aren't they?
Yeah,
we
they're
put
for
it.
sale.
Yeah, we put in a thing several times asking, could we have permission? And because we couldn't get hold of any, we just went ahead and did it. So it's actually in the film. There's one little shot of your parents' home.
Yeah.
So yeah, do come and see it. And you buy the DVD, 10 quid to buy the DVD even better.
Anyone else? There you go, Amanda. Not so much running this time.
Just out of interest, how much did you pay for the cinema?
I'm really not at liberty to say that actually. The reason being is that we have actually bought it outright, and it is unprecedented for a charity to be given that much money to buy its own building. We are gobsmacked, to be fair. It's a benefactor that we want to keep anonymous because they obviously saw the work that we're doing. We do have actually got to raise about probably 2 million to create the bottom into a state-of-the-art art centre. But what is fabulous is that we've had to have the stage rebuilt and we've had it rewired so that we can use it straight away. And in fact, the signage went out today. We've got a big grand opening on Sunday, which I'm afraid is fully booked. We're doing 2 sessions, but we've done a drama about the history of the theatre, which includes Charles Dickens, D'Oyly Carte, Agatha Christie, Oscar Wilde, and Disraeli. Yeah, Disraeli, yes, exactly. Benjamin Disraeli used to come and see his fancy lady here, so and came to the Royal Lyceum. So yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm not really liberty. I don't want to do that because these people have been so generous to us. But we are a charity, but it has actually enabled us to sort of take the next step up and really develop the work that we want to do.
Great. Any more? No. Okay, if I can just finish up with a few things. This event was able to be put on with Colin Matthews, with this wonderful gem of a theatre. If he hadn't been here, this theatre wouldn't be here. Excellent shows, excellent entertainment on your doorstep. So the Community Development Trust, along with Amanda and Jenny, got together and we put the first show on. So with David Scott, Ian Churchwood, Martin Harris, and you haven't used your hashtag line.
It's going to be great!
I thought the award-winning.
Oh, award-winning.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's thanks for everyone attending. It's been great. Great to see you all here, especially on this hot summer's day. Again, great thanks to Colin Matthews for letting us be here. Sharon, who's on holiday, and all her wonderful staff. Please, please, please fill in your comment forms. There are some pens around. I think you've got them, Amanda, have you? Yeah, there's 2 pens. Yeah. So please do fill them in so we know what you want for the community. Again, down here, we have the merchandising here. And we've got a new programme in the leaflet. It's Live Longer and Better. Is that right, Jeff? Yes, I got told thumbs up. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you all very much. And let's give these guys a big round of applause.
Welcome to Unleashed Theatre Company.
I've been coming to this church all my life. What do you mean there are no places available?
I want to change my will.
How are we supposed to live like this with our menfolk banged up and next to jail?
If ever I saw the haunting gaze of death in a Torbay. You want to see squalor? You won't see nothing like this in your fancy tourist guide. Follow me.
I will not be defied. Take this, Peter. You will deliver it.
I'm not going to stand by and let this happen. We need a call to action.
Oh my, it's a body.
And from the streets of Torquay to the silver screen, the homeless community group are starring in their own period drama. As we know, theatre performances have been unable to continue during the pandemic, so a drama group that works with the homeless community in Torbay decided to venture into the world of cinema. And rather than starting small, they went full scale and created a feature-length costume drama. Johnny Rutherford's been to meet them.
My sister Jeannie and I wintered in Torquay in the fall of 1847. And having travelled much around the globe, we found this so-called Queen of Watering Places a town of complete contrasts.
The 50-minute film called The Rich and the Pure is based on a true story of austerity and hardship in Victorian Torquay in the 1840s.
Richard, look what's just arrived in the post. What is it?
They may look like professional actors, but they're not. This is their first film, and the cast is made up of people who not that long ago lived on the streets or indeed are in the process of recovery.
2021, Torbay is still one of the most deprived areas in the southwest, and look at the state of homelessness, and these guys, they can say it and they've actually lived it. So to have them in a costume drama where they're acting out roles that in many respects reflect their own journey, I mean, was just priceless.
Well, you must come and stay with us till you get yourself sorted. Hold on a minute, woman. Basically, I'm in recovery from alcohol. I ended up in the street. I ended up in the homeless hostel, and it was just awful. I couldn't do anything. And then Martin came into the hostel one day and he said to me, "Do you want to act?" And I went, "No, no way." But eventually, I did do it, and it was the road to recovery. It's been a long road, but it's been a brilliant road.
You meet people from all walks of life with different problems, but this brings us all together.
Has it helped you?
Yeah, it has. It's given me my confidence back. I can laugh.
The whole film has been shot around Torquay. Imagine this street 175 years ago.
We need to get the story out there for all to see the injustice. Now is the time to seize the day.
I'm coming through the ashes myself of a broken childhood and a broken life. There is a lot of deprivation in Torquay. We see it as a holiday resort, but actually there's a lot of homelessness, a lot of addiction. Like the poor in the back street that we filmed, it's unspoken and nothing's done about it. But Annie in this film, even though it was a character, was able to do something about it.
And they're hoping the messages in the film and the fact of who made it will shine a light on the issues of homelessness. Johnny Rutherford, BBC Spotlight, Torquay.
It was over 20 years ago that we first performed our first production when a ragbag of disparate actors stepped onto the stage at the Little Theatre in Torquay to perform a modern dress production of St John's Gospel. Over the years we have produced a wide range of productions, from full-scale musicals, gritty thought-provoking dramas, sketch and musical reviews, to now full-scale feature films. I think what all these productions have in common is that they have brought a diverse community of people together from right across society to participate in community projects that all, without an exception, have a message of hope. 3 years ago, off the back of the large-scale, big homeless musicals that we produced at the Princess Theatre, Under One Roof 1, Under One Roof 2, we launched the Unleashed Community Choir, which was again for anyone who perhaps felt on the margins of society. And this choir is for people who perhaps have never sung before, so it was to help them perhaps find their voice. They didn't have to read music, and most importantly, it was a completely free choir for anyone who perhaps suffered from anxiety or mental health issues or was struggling with addiction. If you would like to be part of Unleashed Community Choir, we are rebooting the choir on Tuesday, the 21st of September, and everyone is welcome. This is a really inspirational choir. We sing a lot of contemporary stuff, a lot of musical theatre, a lot of inspirational songs. It's always upbeat. Come along, make friends. It's a free choir. You don't need to be able to sing, you don't need to be able to read music. We will help you find your voice and be part of something that is great fun to be. In 2014, we launched Unleashed Community Drama, which was a social action theatre group specifically for folk who were either homeless or had experienced homelessness or were struggling with some form of addiction and perhaps were on a 12-step programme. Now, this group, Unleashed Community Drama, meets every week, 51 weeks of the year, and has grown into an inspirational community of actors, all on a journey of recovery together. We have, in the last 5 years, now become a registered community interest charity, which means that we rely totally on funding from anyone who will get behind us and support the work we do. So now we are giving you the opportunity to become a friend of Unleashed. So what does becoming a friend mean? Well, how do I become a friend and what are the benefits? If you become a friend of Unleashed, then you will, for £50 up front or for £5 a month, that's £60 a year, you will receive these benefits. You can either you will get an early bird opportunity to book any of our shows before the general public, and you will get 10% discount. We're going to provide every year a annual get-together specifically for our supporters and patrons with refreshments, which will give you an update on what we've been up to and what's coming up in the future. And we will even throw in a bit of entertainment. Perhaps the choir will sing, Unleashed Community Drama will perhaps do a couple of sketches. And you will also get a complimentary gift. As you see, we have produced many shows over the years, which we have written and produced from scratch. And so we've been able to film them, and they are available as DVDs, which we sell to obviously help our funds. So a complimentary gift will possibly be a DVD or perhaps a t-shirt, something like that. But I think the most important benefit you will get from being a friend is knowing that you are supporting and being part of something that's really important in your local community. But most importantly, what you will get is that you will get the knowledge that you are supporting and being part of something really important in your local community, which is working to make a real difference to the quality of people's lives, as well as helping many people find their way back into society from a dark place of addiction and anxiety. Unleashed Theatre Company is a unique theatre company because it is a company that embraces everyone. We're very diverse, we have no judgment, everyone is welcome, and we are aware that everybody is fighting their own battle. And so what we provide is a place where people can learn to develop their performance skills, where they can learn to sing, where they can learn to act in a safe environment, and perhaps have that opportunity they've never had before to perform at the Princess Theatre or the Little Theatre or wherever we perform, and be part of something that is inspirational and always has a message of hope.
Hey, I had a funny one the other evening. I come out here after my tea and I must have nodded off. Because the next thing I know, there's a bloke from the Housing Association stood by my back gate. What he actually said was, I want to see your privates. So, I did what anybody would do in that situation. I give him a slap.
If you would like to become a friend of Unleashed, then do pick up one of our leaflets that you'll find here in the foyer at this particular theatre, or speak to one of our volunteers and we will help you to become our friend. We produced a production for Babbacombe Theatre every year for 10 years, producing full-scale summer theatrical productions ranging from Stephen Schwartz's Godspell and Children of Eden right through to The Millennium Mysteries, which was a play that was written specially for us and commissioned by Babbacombe Theatre to celebrate their millennium.
Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania, to speak to the judge from the Michael Farmer trial. Need to scare you.
Do I look scared to you?
Hold on, man. I know this guy.
Ladies and chains at the bridge, man. You got a shift? Well, you do now.
No! No, man, don't you die! Don't you leave me here!
Excuse me. It's Maria, right? She was mine.
In 2009, we were commissioned by Babbacombe Theatre to produce their very first summer outreach production, What's So Amazing About Grace, which we performed for a week in the open air outside the West Door at Babbacombe Theatre.
In warehouse. You remember, you're a court. Meet Manny.
I'm here to tell you something. You're just slapping, huh? You know.
Well, that's good.
That's a wretch like me.
Try and think of a name for it.